The box hit the floor with a crash. Photographs and keepsakes scattered across the cold tile like wounded memories. I dropped to my knees, heart pounding, hands shaking. Across from me stood Elena, my mother-in-law, with a satisfied smirk on her face. "You think any of this matters?" she sneered. I stared at the pieces of my past. Snapshots of childhood, letters from my father, faded ticket stubs. She had shattered more than a box. She had crossed a line. I'm Maya Winters. I'm 32 years old. And what Elena didn't know was that this war, her war, started long ago. What she saw as a petty act of power was the final trigger in a battle I'd been preparing for quietly, patiently, and with absolute precision. Elena had never accepted me. Not when I married her son, Michael. Not when I succeeded on my own. To her I wasn't good enough. Too small town, too ordinary, too me. At our wedding rehearsal, when other mothers were smoothing veils and calming nerves, she was whispering doubts into Michael's ear. "She's not from our world. Are you sure about this?" Still I smiled. Played along. I documented everything. What Elena didn't know was that I'm a digital forensics specialist. And for the past few years I'd quietly collected evidence. Texts, emails, voicemails, all showing her slow, methodical attempts to isolate me, to rewrite the family story without me in it. As I gathered the torn memories, Michael appeared in the doorway. His face was pale. "Ma, what did you do?" he whispered. I shrugged. "Cleaning up. These things don't belong in our family album." Our family album. I looked up at her, my voice steady. "These are my memories. My life before your son. And they do belong because I belong." She scoffed. "We'll make a new story. One that fits." But what she didn't know was, I already had the real story, and proof of her manipulations stretching back years. That night, Michael and I sat quietly in our living room, photos spread between us like broken glass. He looked lost, and finally I told him. "I need you to see something," I said, sliding a folder toward him. "Screenshots, transcripts, recordings. This is what she's done. Me. To us." He stared in silence, a storm of recognition brewing behind his eyes. The truth unraveled everything he thought he knew. Elena hadn't erased my past. She'd exposed herself. The next morning I arrived early at my office. My colleague David handed me coffee and raised an eyebrow. "You look like you're about to launch an investigation." It was. The war had begun, and I was done playing nice. If only he knew how accurate his words were. I dove headfirst into the task, assembling a meticulous timeline of Elena's manipulative behavior. Texts, email threads, voice recordings. Each file became a piece of a much larger puzzle, revealing a calculated pattern of emotional control that stretched far beyond just me. Michael's support was vital. That night, after witnessing the destruction of my memories, something in him cracked open. As he sifted through the evidence, his hands trembled. "I can't believe I didn't see it before," he whispered. "But I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth exposed, and the generational cycle of toxic control shattered." Elena's behavior wasn't an isolated case of maternal overreach. It was a legacy of psychological dominance woven into the fabric of their family. And I suspected others had suffered in silence. So I reached out carefully without accusation. I messaged Michael's cousins, spoke gently with extended relatives who had always seemed tense at family events. "Do you remember when Aunt Elena talked Sarah out of pursuing art school?" I asked casually, watching for flickers of recognition. The answers came slowly. Quiet confirmations. Subdued sighs. The kind of silence that had been trained into them for years. Bit by bit, a broader picture emerged. Elena's reach wasn't just emotional. It was financial, professional, even legal. Her control disguised as concern. Her manipulation cloaked in family loyalty. My digital forensics background wasn't just a profession. It was now a scalpel. I traced her digital footprint. Subtle financial transfers, suspiciously timed property movements, buried threads of influence. Everything was cross-referenced, saved, verified. Michael, for all his pain, stood beside me, but not without struggle. His entire identity had been shaped by a woman who equated control with care. "She always said it was for our own good," he murmured one night, staring blankly at the floor. "Control isn't love," I said gently. "It's fear disguised as protection." And slowly he began to see it too. Piece by piece, we weren't just building a case against Elena. We were rebuilding Michael from the inside out. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Sarah, the cousin whose artistic dreams had been crushed, agreed to meet. Over coffee she opened up. Her voice was low, hesitant, as if she still feared Elena might overhear. "She told me I'd embarrass the family if I became an artist," she said, eyes filling with tears. "She made me believe I wasn't good enough." Her story matched the others. Guilt, shame, subtle sabotage. Another branch of Elena's twisted family tree revealed. This wasn't just about my marriage. This was about a toxic dynasty. One woman's control spreading across generations, silencing ambition, rewriting narratives, and burying identities. But not anymore. Michael was changing. I watched him begin to question everything he'd been taught. Each truth we uncovered peeled back the layers of illusion his mother had built. "I thought her control was love," he said one evening, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how toxic it really was." And now, he did. The digital evidence was overwhelming. Screenshots of manipulative texts, recordings that revealed emotional sabotage, financial records that exposed quiet, calculated control. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about truth, about healing, about breaking a legacy of harm masked as tradition. As the documentation grew, so did the scope of the mission. This wasn't just a personal conflict anymore. It was a reckoning with generational trauma. Elena's attempt to erase my past had awakened something she couldn't possibly understand. A precise, patient, and compassionate countermeasure. A movement toward liberation. More relatives came forward, those whose voices had long been silenced. Dreams abandoned, ambitions crushed, relationships strained. All under Elena's guidance. Each testimony became part of a growing archive. Michael watched it all unfold, his clarity sharpening with every page we turned. "How do you stay so calm?" he asked one evening, his voice raw. Smiled. "Because true power doesn't come from destroying people. It comes from exposing the truth, giving others the space to grow, and finally letting the healing begin." The final phase had begun. I planned the family gathering myself, down to the smallest detail. Every invitation, every gesture carefully arranged. Elena believed it was just another reunion. She didn't know it was the stage for the truth to unfold. The estate buzzed with old familiar faces, cousins, aunts, uncles, many of whom hadn't attended in years. Elena, in her usual air of control, worked the room like a queen presiding over her court. She had no idea what was coming. Every person there held something. An email, a recording, a message, a piece of evidence. They hadn't come just to eat and reminisce. They had come for release. Michael stood beside me, his hand finding mine. Years of manipulation undone by a single, quiet resolve. "Are you ready?" he asked. He nodded. And I rose to speak. "I'd like to share something," I said calmly, raising my glass. The room fell silent. Elena's smile froze. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I simply revealed. One story at a time. The cousin whose art career had been dismantled by guilt. The aunt pushed out of a job she loved. The family members quietly isolated from one another. Each story backed by undeniable proof. Each voice reclaiming their truth. Elena's mask began to slip. She stammered, insisted it was a conspiracy. But the room didn't believe her anymore. The silence she had enforced for decades cracked, then broke wide open. And then Sarah stood up. The artist who was told she'd shame the family. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "For years, I believed I wasn't enough. That my dreams were selfish. But I see now that wasn't love. That was fear disguised as family. Elena didn't erupt. She simply unraveled. Quiet collapse. A woman watching the web she spun come undone thread by thread. And something miraculous happened. The family began to reconnect. Not through blame, but through honesty, empathy, and choice. Michael turned to me, eyes shining. "Thank you," he whispered, "for helping me finally see. This was never about defeating your mother," I said. "It was about freeing you from her story." The aftermath was quiet but powerful. Elena wasn't shunned. She was offered therapy, space, accountability. Some relatives stepped away. Others cautiously opened the door to reconciliation. But the cycle, it was broken. Sarah held her first art show months later. Michael began therapy, learning to untangle love from control. And the photos Elena tried to destroy, I restored them. They now lined our walls, not as reminders of pain, but as symbols of endurance. Elena's greatest weapon had always been control. But in trying to erase my past, she exposed her own. And in that, I reclaimed not only my story, but the future of an entire family. The ultimate revenge wasn't humiliation. It was compassion. It was truth. It was freedom.